Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So I passed around the sign-in sheet. Hopefully that's making its way around the room. So what we're going to do today is, I think this is a good time for us to sort of take a pause here, and we're about halfway point of the class, and sort of catch our breath as to where we are. So we had our second exam on last weekend, so hopefully everyone had a chance to do that. Didn't get timed out, any bad outcome like that. So if anybody didn't take it for whatever reason, let me know, send me an email, or stop by and see me, and we'll make sure that you can get access to the exam. You can have until the end of this week to do that. I'll make the results available for this exam after next Monday, so that everyone can see how you did, what you got right, what you got wrong, and it's always helpful to have that. I know faster feedback is better than slower feedback, and I realize that, but sometimes it's a trade-off between allowing the flexibility of make-up opportunities, which some instructors frankly don't do at all, and the opportunity of knowing right away where you stood on every question. And if you do have specific questions on any individual exam, not a problem if you really want to find out between now and next Monday. So okay, so where we are in the class, we're about halfway point. So we're going to cover chapter 8 today. I believe it's chapter 8. That deals with market structure, and this is the sort of the main set of topics for this particular segment of the class. So I always like to think of this class as being broken into 4 segments, and the first is mostly introductory, sort of ending with demand and supply. The second is sort of building the transition from what is general overall economic concepts to micro specifically, and sort of culminating in that last chapter, which we spent quite a lot of time on, about 3 class sessions, talking about the issue of production and costs, marginal values, and the interplay between marginals and averages. And then this is all good lead up until really what is, I think, sort of the heart of this course, and that's market structure. This is where we talk about the organization of the supply side of markets. And so if you take a look here at, I've got a PowerPoint posted. I'll post this a bit later today. I'm still making some tweaks to this particular one. And this is, since we have a different textbook for this, we have the free textbook, it's a little bit different. And you guys can see this, it's a little back with the light on because I'm going to keep a light on for just a bit here. And this part deals with market structure theory. Now, what's the theory part of this? Where does the term theory fit in? Well, the theory fits in the sense that all firms belong to one of 4 industrial types. So for the next several weeks, we're going to be focusing on the economics of business firms, okay? And I know that there does seem to be sort of and this is the case with all introductory econ courses really every place, but there does seem to be sort of a focus on firms as opposed to the other actors. And for those who study further in detail the other actors like households and government, there's certainly a lot of other courses out there that are beyond this introductory course, but this is sort of a good tie-in, and it's also one of the prereqs for a lot of business school programs. And certainly I don't teach this as an assumption that everyone is going to a business school, but for those who are, this is a definite prereq. And some of the concepts you'll see here come up again in your later career if you do study business or one of the business related disciplines, things like fixed cost, variable cost, profit, break even, those kind of things. Those all come up as being a part of the picture a bit later on. Okay, so that's what market structure it deals with. It's the idea we can take every firm theoretically, and I say theoretically, which is why the term theory is used here, can fit into one of 4 industrial types, one of 4 structures. And those structures are, in the chapterization of the text, sort of goes along these lines: perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. Okay, and we're going to cover these one at a time, and we're going to focus on what these are all about individually. Okay, and so when we talk about these 4 structures, what is it that is important to know? Well, the first thing, I mean, there are a lot of things that are important to know, but one of the first things that is important is the idea that we've got the first 2 here are really polar opposites of one another. This is North Pole, South Pole, positive charge, negative charge, however you want to think about it. These are complete opposites of one another. In fact, as we sort of break down some of the characteristics of perfect competition, with the exception of profit maximization, which is the goal of all business firms, that almost every characteristic of perfect competition can be flipped on its head and can describe monopoly. That is, lots of competition, no competition. No barriers to entry, that is, firms can come and go as they like, lots of barriers to entry. So these two are very much opposite one another. Another thing that's important to know is this: you've got, after having said all that, the idea that these are polar opposites, these are, whatever sort of binary differences you could point out. Then we've got one that's a hybrid of both, which sounds a little bit incongruous. How do you have two things that are opposite one another, and then you have this one here? It's kind of like this little competition. It's kind of like that movie Basketball, right? When you're kind of taking a few things that don't really go together and putting them together. But you'll see that as we get through this is really a very interesting market structure, because a lot of business firms, particularly a lot of the ones that we know of any size, tend to fit into the monopolistic competition realm. That is, for some time, while they've got market strength and brand strength, they can have sort of monopoly power in the market, or monopoly-like power. I know that sometimes people get the idea that any strong firm is a monopoly, and that's not often the case. In fact, we make the case here that monopolies in the real world, outside of what we call the natural monopolies, we'll talk about that more on Wednesday, outside of the natural monopolies, which are mostly local utilities, water, electricity and whatnot, the monopolies in the real world are kind of few and far between, and they didn't used to be. But antitrust laws, both here in Europe and elsewhere, have mostly broken a lot of these up. And I mentioned, I think it was to this class, that we talked about the idea that the government is looking to do a major antitrust action. I know we haven't talked about antitrust yet, but it's basically breaking up big firms that are monopolistically inclined. And they're going after Google right now, which I think is very interesting, and we'll see how that works. So for the time, these firms in this third structure can have monopoly power, but then revert to sort of a competitive aspect. And some of these firms have been around for a very long time and don't have quite the pricing power that they once had when they have monopoly power. Then we have one that's sort of a different one here, and that's oligopoly. Oligopoly is almost the very definition, the walking, talking definition of big business, particularly those firms that have lots and lots of market share and not very many competitors. And it's very difficult to get into. We're talking only maybe a handful of competing firms. And it's not that it's impossible to compete against them, but it's very difficult. It takes lots and lots of money to do it. And so as a result, we're left with very few competitors. So what can we say about monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly? These three together, what we can say is we can collectively group them as one particular item, and that's what we call imperfect competition. Now, we're doing more than just simply playing word games here, because there are some characteristics of imperfect competition that are they have some commonalities. And it's not just the fact that, well, it's one thing to say, okay, well, if you're not perfect competition, you must be by definition imperfect competition. That is true. That's not incorrect, but there's more than that going on here, because there are particularly some things with regard to revenue and pricing strategy that makes this a bit different. And so, these three structures are a bit different than perfect competition. And so we're going to get into that and talk about why they're different. And it really has to do with the ability to set the price of the product to the extent that these firms can set price. And we're going to make the case that these firms in perfect competition cannot set price. Okay. So that's the thing that you want to know about there. One other thing here, I want to sort of circle back to another thing here, because I think I just mentioned it a minute ago, this idea of the goals of economic actors. And so I think it's a good time, since now we're sort of at the midpoint of the course, and I want to talk a bit about, we're going to be covering all these actors as we get going throughout the course. We've talked a bit about households and what are their objectives. Okay, what are the objectives? And you probably have this in your notes somewhere, but I want to go ahead and write it down so everyone's got it. What are the objectives of economic actors? And so when we talk about households first, we say that the objectives of households is to maximize utility. Maximize utility in consumption. We talked about utility in consumption in chapter 6, where we talked about the idea that utility is this idea of the satisfaction or benefit that we get from consuming goods. And this also has a sort of a macroeconomic parallel as well, because there's a set of macro theories, and I know this is not a macro course, but that talks about the idea of the end point, the objective of all economics is to be able to consume output and be able to consume goods for our own benefit. But this is a social science. So we're dealing with how societies react and how they act. And what they do is they're trying to maximize their own utility to consumption. Now, I know that these are actors, and actors do what? They play roles, right? And we talked about this idea way back, circular flow model back in week 1, week 2, whenever it was. The idea that between 9 and 5, one is a worker, and then after 5 o'clock, one's a consumer. Those are different roles. Just like with the firm is a producer, and that's one actor role, and the firm is also an employer, and that's another actor role. But in this case, you might say, okay, well, all you've got here is the role as consumer. Where is the role of worker? And I realize that seems to be missing here. But here's the idea that you might say, well, isn't the objective of households two things? If they're actors, they play 2 roles. Aren't there 2 objectives? Isn't it just to maximize income and also to maximize utility? And I think that that's that first part is difficult to accept, I think there's not a lot of evidence that households do seek to maximize income. Sure, there are people out there that will do anything for money and will work 2, 3 jobs. We'll flip coupons. We'll try to find the cheapest of everything. We'll look around for sales. I've known some people who are like that. They absolutely want to make the most benefit they can, work as much overtime, save as much in order to accumulate income and wealth. Yeah, they're out there. I think that's not the norm, however. I really do not think that's the norm. I think people are mostly content to have leisure time. And I think there's an important aspect of that. There is quite a lot of work that's been done on the economics of leisure, which sounds like the opposite of the objective, which is to maximize income. Well, it's not the objective. That's why, because that's why we don't say it's an objective. If it were to maximize income, then we would have very little leisure time. But instead, people do value their leisure. They value their family time, all other kind of things, social time with others, all kinds of economic events. And so instead, all this is enjoying the benefits then of economic life. And so that's why we don't say that. On the other hand, we have got a different actor altogether. And this is why I and a lot of other economists push back on this idea of trying to analogize between economic actors and say, because we know politicians do this all the time. They say, hey, why can't government balance its budget the way households do? Well, first of all, households, even by their own definition, don't balance their budgets. Any household that borrows money is not a balanced budget under that calculation. If you earn $100,000 a year, a good income, you borrow $300,000 to buy a house, that would make you out of balance for that year. But nobody says, hey, don't borrow money to buy a house. What are you, crazy? The idea that somehow we can analogize and link together and say that they're all the same thing, actors are all the same. Governments, households, firms is completely crazy. And the same goes to households and firms. They're different ideas, they're different concepts. And as a result, and I know sometimes you simply think of firms as collections of people and materials doing things, but their idea of what their objective is to maximize profit. In particular, we're going to say economic profit. Although economic profit, frankly, in the real world is a little bit of a difficult concept because a lot of people don't really buy into it that much. It's more abstract, it's sort of out there in the ether, the idea of profit. We went over this in the last segment of the class. Economic profit takes into account the relevant opportunity costs. That is, if we're making bar soap and we're making shampoo, maybe we should stop making shampoo and make bar soap and kitchen cleanser, right? I mean, it's that kind of idea. What is the best thing for us to be doing, right? And so we have to get rid of the profit that we make from making shampoo because we're no longer doing that. And so as a result, we factor that into a cost. This is why economic profit is less than accounting profit at all times. And that's a little bit hard to understand. It's a little bit hard to grasp. And frankly, and I understand the accounting and financial pushback on the idea of economic profit because they're saying, well, tell us what the economic cost is and we'll include it. Instead, the accounting world recognizes, and I agree with the logic, that a cost can be recognized as that which is objective, measurable, verifiable, reliable. 2 people are going to be able to look at it and agree on a cost. Well, that's not the case for an opportunity cost, where 2 people can agree on it. And I'm not saying that there's no recognition that it doesn't exist by the business world. I'm just saying I put it in a little bit in brackets here because maybe we could say accounting and economic profit. As economists, I think it's probably best that we push back on the idea and say economic profit is really what we're sort of looking at here. Realizing, of course, it's a difficult concept. And by the way, in the accounting world, if you're ever looking at business financial statements, you might see a footnote somewhere there, for those of you who've taken accounting, a footnote that says, okay, well, something happened where, I don't know, we closed our operation in Nigeria, and so we're no longer there, and we earned $20 million last year, and so that's that's missing from this year's income because we closed that operation. Well, it's not that they wrote a check for $20 million, it's just that they had chosen not to get that income from that operation in Nigeria, right, for whatever reason. So, so you get the idea. It's there. They don't recognize it as an actual cost, but it's real. So back to this idea of actors. What do they have to do? They have to maximize profit. That incorporates both of their roles as both producer and an employer. So here we do sort of link together both of those roles in their actor roles, and that is they're looking to maximize profit through all that they do. Through trying to get the most profit they can from selling to consumers, making a good product, trying to earn the most, and also from employing people. They try to get the most benefit out of people. I know that sometimes it's very controversial for workers because I know that when I was in the business world, we had a threat of a strike looming, and we had some consultants fly in, some labor lawyers who said, and they showed us a video where the pitch to workers was always, well, they want to pay us, they want us to work the hardest we can, and they want to pay us as little as we can. And the guy stopped the video and said, yeah, I guess you caught us, right? And I mean, there's a recognition, yes, firms would like to get the most out of workers and pay them as little as possible. In other words, pay them just enough to get them quitting, and they work hard enough just to end up from getting fired. And that latter part may be a little bit cynical, but I think you kind of get the idea that they're trying to maximize profit. And so if you ever wonder why firms aren't more generous with some employees, and some firms are very generous with workers, it's because of this idea of maximizing profit. Now, I realize too, this is a controversial aspect in today's world because a lot of business firms are very active in society at pushing back on things that are considered to be wrong, in particular from governments that are passing laws which a lot of business firms are finding to be objectionable. The case of Disney in Florida is one example of that. And the governor of Florida sort of reacted quite negatively to push back against a law having to do, I think, with education in public schools. I forget exactly what the issue was. One thing that I think sort of came to mind as being a firm activism was in the state of Indiana a few years ago, where there was a law passed. There was a blatantly anti-LGBT law, just blatant. It wasn't even sort of coded in any kind of way. And a lot of business firms reacted violently. Salesforce saying they would move out of the state. Angie's List, which is based there, said they were going to close their operation. So they revised the law. They revised it in some way that was a little bit less strenuous, but it was more of a religious freedom. Instead, if you are a baker and you don't want to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple, that you don't have to do that. And it was the same authors as before. It wasn't much better. And so this is when firms really stood up with an activism that I don't think I had seen before, and acting really against their own maximizing interest to say, look, we are going to close Salesforce. We're going to leave. We're going to do all these things. And the state revised that law. So firms are more active than what they ever have been in societal issues, which leads you to believe that maximizing profit may not be. And I would bring up this scenario just to show you that this is perhaps a concept that is being tested as firms get more active in society. And I think business firms are thinking right now that a lot of times our politics have not caught up with where society is. And I think that's probably the case in a lot of ways. I think there are a lot of laws out there that probably do not reflect where society is. And so maximizing profit is difficult, despite the idea that one of the main economists in this country, Milton Friedman, for years said it's the only objective of firms is to maximize profit. But they should not be involved in making society better, or making the world a better place, or making the world cleaner. I think that idea is coming under some real challenge. Okay. And then the final category here is government. And so what is the objective of government? It's to maximize social welfare. Now, I know I spent a little bit of time this afternoon talking about this, and I've covered some of it, but I think it's important for us to understand that a lot of the actions that we're going to be focusing on in this category here are going to be all geared toward trying to maximize profit. Even if that profit is negative, it's still, you're trying to maximize your negative profit, that is to push it closer to zero as opposed to something far to the left of the number line there. Even if it's zero, even if it's negative, it's still trying to maximize profit. And that's the objective of all firms. In fact, we're going to make the case with perfect competition that in the long run, economic profit is essentially zero. Maybe not accounting profit, but economic profit is essentially zero. And part of that is based on the logic of the fact that it sort of has to be zero. And we're going to get into that plenty and talk about what that's about. Okay. So when we talk about government, we're talking about maximizing social welfare. The term welfare here should not be construed to include necessarily any or identify any particular program. I know that sometimes we hear the word welfare and we think of welfare as being a particular program like food assistance or whatever. And the term welfare here goes way back to the original meaning of the term, and that's the most benefit to the most people in society. And so the idea that the government, ideally, and I know the government, we can sort of maybe snicker at this a little bit and say, well, yeah, that'd be nice if government actually did try to maximize social welfare, because I get it, government's not perfect. But that is at least the objective, or the theoretical objective, is to try to improve conditions for society. Okay. All right. So questions about that. All right. Well, all this is in sort of a lead into the first of these of category number 2, and that's business firms. And that's the first thing we're going to cover is that top category, perfect competition. So what about perfect competition? And what is it that we need to know about perfect competition? So let's give you some characteristics here. I'll post this PowerPoint a bit later today so you've got that. And here, I think I will dim the lights a bit so this is easier to see. So what are some of the characteristics of it? And then we'll get into some of the graphics of this. We'll introduce some terms and some concepts. And we'll talk about when firms leave and the market and whatnot. So, but first, let's sort of get a roundup here of what the characteristics are. And notice too, and you'll be able to see this clearly, I think, on Wednesday or after Wednesday's class, that all these characteristics you can sort of swivel around, with the exception of this idea of profit maximizing activity. Almost all of these are quite different when it comes to monopoly. Those are really polar opposites of one another. So what is the first characteristic? The characteristic is that there are many buyers and many sellers. When we talk about many buyers and many sellers, it's practically infinite, or it might as well be. And as a result, you've got lots of buyers, lots of sellers. In particular, the idea of sellers, I think, is most important. It's the idea that there are lots of sellers. And as a result of this first one sort of leads into the other, that sellers, individual seller firms, we're talking about business firms, have very small market share percentages. Could be 1%, could be a half of 1%, could be a tenth of 1%, could be extremely tiny. We're talking about lots and lots and lots of competitors. And as a result, you've got very small market share percentages. And as a result, there's not very much what we call market power. And we're going to talk a bit more about market power, particularly as we get into monopolies. But suffice to say that when we talk about perfect competition, market power is very nil. And that is market power in terms of what? Well, in terms of pretty much everything with regard to the transaction. That is the price, the form of the product that we can produce, how it has to be delivered, what the expectations of buyers are, what the product is, how the product has to be presented to ultimate buyers, all those kind of things. There's really no control. The seller basically takes the situation as given. Sellers may also relatively freely enter and exit the market. That is, there are low barriers to entry and low barriers to exit. Okay, well, let's talk about this. Talk about barriers to entry and barriers to exit. This is an important topic that I think we should talk about and maybe make a little so we can focus on what this is. So, and we'll come back to this, but I think it's important that we sort of get these definitions out of the way. It does take a little bit of time to go over some of these characteristics of, I mean, as we get to like oligopoly and monopolistic competition, we'll be sort of zipping through these because we won't have to define certain topics like barriers to entry and whatnot. We'll always already have those down. But what is a barrier to entry? This may be a term that is familiar to some of you. Maybe it's not, but it's a term that is used all the time in economics and business. And for those of you who take any further business courses, I don't care if it's marketing, finance, operations, you'll hear this term barriers to entry. Barriers to entry are essentially anything that can prevent new firms from entering a market. Okay? Barriers to entry are anything. And I say anything, I'm being very indefinite here, I realize, but it's a lot of things. It's anything which can prevent new firms from entering a market. Okay? So, in other words, how can you keep competition out when there are low barriers to entry? Okay, so, and one reality of the supply side is the idea that nobody likes competition. I think that's probably safe to say. If you're a seller, you don't like competition. But keep in mind, I say the supply side because it also includes the labor force, right? Even we as workers don't like people competing for our jobs and having more qualifications than we do. And sometimes we're suspicious of new hires into our firm because what's that person going to do? They're hiring them to replace me. I mean, we get this idea. We don't want to be replaced, right? And the same goes with business firms. They don't want to be replaced, but there's not much they can do about it because the entry barriers here are very low. Now, entry barriers are anything which prevent new firms from entering the market. So these are a collection of things, and let's spend a little bit of time going through some a listing of these, and what can keep competition out, and in its absence or in their absence, what can keep what can not stop them from entering. So what are some examples? Well, one of these are legal protections, and this in itself is a gigantic area of the law, and you've probably heard patent lawyers and copyright lawyers. We're talking about legal protections here. We're talking about things like patents. And what is a patent? Patent basically is a legal monopoly, which I know we haven't talked about yet, the structure monopoly, but it's a legal right for some seller to produce some good and be the exclusive producer of that good. And so if you produce a new good, it's a new product, whatever it is, or even a twist on an old product, and you can patent that. And what you do is you simply have a patent lawyer who files the necessary paperwork with the patent office in the United States and say, okay, this is our patent. And what it is simply and it could be anything. It could be the form of a product. It could be the way the product is designed. It could be the way the product works. It could be a formula. It could be particularly drugs, and patents on prescription drugs are one of the most common forms of patents. That is a drug company spends years developing a drug and then wants to have the ability to be paid back for that drug. And so it seeks to obtain a patent. By the way, they were successful at getting the term of these patents extended for a few years. I think it used to be 7 years. I don't know what it is now. I think it's longer. And it may differ depending upon the type of product. I'm not an expert in patents necessarily, but I think it may be 10 years for prescription drugs where they've got a longer patent. That is a longer payback period for their investment in creating new drugs. And the rate of new drug creation is just through the roof. I mean, particularly since the pandemic and everyone's back to work and whatnot, just the creation of patents is just exploding in the drug industry. All kinds of drugs, some of which don't have much of a market at all, which is why the prices are so high, is because there may be only, I don't know, several thousand patients in the United States alone that may have a particular condition. So, but you're seeing all these drugs on TV ads for these conditions that nobody ever heard of. Like, I mean, sort of, I never heard of them. I'm not a medical doctor, but anyway, but from our standpoint, from an economic standpoint, it's the way to get legal protection for the particular drug. I believe now there's also a patenting, it's a very controversial, we're patenting on DNA sequences, which I think is very controversial. And that's an area that is sort of new and maybe the law will change at some point. So patents are one, copyrights are another. Copyright has to do with intellectual property, particularly written works, musical works, artistic creations and whatnot, and it's got a much longer life than what patents do. It usually extends to the life of the owner of the copyright, plus X number of years afterwards. And then even then, there can be an extension of that. I know William Faulkner's work, his family had extended his copyright many, many years after his death. And so as a result, those books were a little bit harder to come by. They weren't in the public domain, like older works like Dickens, who's been dead forever, and plus was not even published in America to begin with. But you get the idea that you get copyrights or intellectual property, musical works, and occasionally you're all the time seeing on the news where so-and-so is suing Beyonce because she stole my lyrics to some song. It's like, and Beyonce's saying no, and the lyrics, sometimes they match up, sometimes they don't, sometimes it's hard to prove. My sister is a book editor. She said that if you create any kind of work, you automatically have a copyright on it by law, even if you haven't filed for a copyright, and it becomes your intellectual property, which is why you probably have to run out and get legal protection. But in the absence of that, you've got a claim. So somebody living in Florida can say, "Hey, Beyonce stole the rights to my song." Oh, Beyonce writes her own songs. Whoever, maybe Taylor Swift, whoever writes their own songs. You're all the time seeing people come forward and say, "Hey, I actually wrote that song," and very often their claims are denied. And sometimes they come many years after the fact, say, "Hey, I wrote that song back in 1971 or whatever." And so you do have that. These are legal protections that give them the exclusive right to earn the income from that particular work or song. So patents, copyrights, trademarks. So trademarks are what? Trademarks are basically trademarking a brand name or a logo or what's called a service mark, which is basically a form of a slogan for a business. And so they own that particular brand and that particular name. So Coca-Cola for years had owned the phrase, "the real thing." That was one of the most common trademarks. McDonald's, we're loving it. You get the idea. There'll be a trademark of a slogan. Also, the logo itself. Coca-Cola went to great lengths to trademark its very cursive logo sign, and then also the reverse image because people were flipping it around and producing T-shirts with it and selling them. And so, as a result, if you do that, you have a trademark infringement. So, if you were to create T-shirts that had, let's say, Albuquerque Isotopes or Los Angeles Dodgers, and you didn't get permission, you'd be in trademark violation. And by the way, trademark holders are very vigilant about enforcing these particular trademarks. And in fact, if they don't enforce them, the law basically says that you have failed to defend any of these, whether it's patents, copyrights, or trademarks, you fail to defend them. So as a result, they become free reign. And there are some brands that have fallen into disuse that the firms no longer exist. And so those people have come in and sort of taken those up because they no longer exist. So trademarks are an important particular aspect of these, and firms will go to great lengths to copyright their trademarks, which is so as to prevent people from making money off of them. And by the way, I know that when it comes to exclusive rights to things, if you ever watch football games or basketball games, it'll say something like reproduction is only possible with the express written permission. That is, you can't show it for commercial purposes unless you have permission. When I was a commercial lender, I had a lady going to a bar. It was a big, huge sports bar, and she would show Monday Night Football games. And so one day, a couple of lawyers walked in from the NFL saying, "Hey, we hear you've been showing Monday Night Football games. We're going to sue you." And apparently their language was very rough. Something like, "You're going to regret the day you were born." And it was all this. It was really. And I thought, "Are you sure these were lawyers? I don't think lawyers talk like that." But he goes, "Well, that's what they said they were," and they threatened her that said, "Look, you've got to pay us a royalty if you are using that because the NFL belongs to us, and any kind of commercial purpose that you use it for cannot go to you exclusively. We have to be cut in on the action, so to speak." So as a result, she was very frightened by that and ended up not showing Monday Night Football games on a big screen in her sports bar. And now you might say, "Well, I see it all the time in Applebee's and whatnot." You do, probably because Applebee's has made a deal with, and Buffalo Wild Wings has made some sort of deal sort of collectively for all their locations with the NFL. I'm sure that's what's happened because they do enforce that. If you don't enforce it, then that's an issue. So that's a barrier to entry. All these are barriers to entry that prevent new firms from coming in, new competitors from coming in. Now, this is an area that there's a lot of controversy over this, particularly given the fact that there are producers around the world who don't really respect these. They don't because there's nothing really stopping them from producing a Rolex watch that's not really a Rolex watch. So if you go to certain parts of the world and you buy a Rolex watch on the street for $50, it's probably not an actual Rolex watch, but it looks like one. It's a quote unquote knockoff. And a lot of these high-end producers, Gucci and Rolex and Louis Vuitton, they've been fighting for years to try to prevent these knockoff goods from hitting the streets in places where people can buy them. And rather than buying their high-priced product, they're buying their low-priced cheap product that is not the same thing, but it looks like the same thing. So it's a difficult thing to prevent, particularly when there are illegal actors out there. So, but these are legal protections that sort of are among a lot of the other sorts of barriers to do that. Okay, so that would be one form of legal protection. Another form of legal protection here is exclusive dealing rights. Okay, exclusive dealing, and so exclusive dealing would be things like in order for you to be a seller here, you've got to have a license. Okay, and I'm thinking liquor licenses in certain parts of the country. And I'm not terribly familiar with New Mexico. I haven't lived here my whole life, but I would imagine you have to have a liquor license to start a liquor store, I would imagine, and to sell alcohol in stores and gas stations and whatnot. And particularly liquor, the hard liquor. And I know in some parts of the country, these are fixed. It's an exclusive dealing right. The numbers of these are fixed. And so I know that if you get a liquor license, it's almost considered a license to print money because if you get a liquor license, you can sell beer and wine and liquor. And by the way, people pass those down to heirs. And so I know I had a friend of mine whose parents had a liquor store and they were getting old. They wanted to pass it down to him. And he said, "I don't want to run a liquor store." And people were saying, why don't you want to run a liquor store? It's like picking money off trees. He said, "I just don't want to do it." So they had to find somebody who actually wanted, and they had no trouble finding somebody who did want to own a liquor store and wanted to, because they're fixed in nature. But that's an idea of exclusive dealing rights. Also, things like licenses are another one. And this is a legal protection as well. And this is more on the professions. In practice, most professions licenses, which is really maybe sort of a subset of exclusive dealing. You can't just say I'm a doctor, like Granny on Beverly Hills and say I'm a doctor. You know, you have to obviously be licensed to be a doctor. But there are a lot of occupations in which you have to have a license to do whatever you do in most states in the US. Okay, whether it's not just doctors and lawyers, but also beauticians, accountants, engineers, security guards, tax preparers. I mean, the list goes on and on of licenses, which means that you've shrunk the pool of those people who are willing to provide the good. And that's sort of a legal protection. So you can't just become a doctor overnight. You've got to go through all the training. And this prevents, and now, I know that there's a legal protection, that there's a public safety protection here. And I get that. I mean, it seeks to limit competition. And that's the effect economically. In fact, we have too few doctors in this country and have had for a very long time. But one of the reasons why is because you have to have a license and there's an exclusive dealing, and medical schools are not looking, it's not easy to start a medical school and find qualified doctors to teach in that. So you get the idea, but licenses just puts a further crimp on the supply, but it's intended to protect the public. All these are intended to protect either the supply side or the public or both. Okay. So those are legal protections. Those are barriers to entry. What are some other barriers to entry? One big one here is simply cost. And this is simply the money cost. And we haven't talked much about money costs yet, but financial cost of getting into it. So there are some industries that are just so expensive that it takes just so much money to enter that very few people want to enter organic investment. So for years, we had a monopoly in this country on long distance telephone service. AT&T had the monopoly for long distance telephone, not just because they had a legal monopoly and exclusive dealing, but also just too gigantic of a cost to get in there and to create a long distance network stretching wires from every phone, every house, every business, all the way across the country. They're hooking up with international, and it was just too difficult. And so the startup people who started MCI went to court for years and years to break up AT&T and to get to use their infrastructure in order to create an alternative landline long distance service to AT&T. And then we had what was called local long distance. I don't want to get into that, but you get the idea that it was just too difficult to get into. It took too long to enter because the cost involved. And also there are some industries like aerospace. There are only very few companies that make machinery that goes into space or is used in military applications. You've really only got a handful, and there are many fewer now than what there used to be. And so there's been some consolidation where Lockheed and Martin Marietta have come together as one firm. Grumman and somebody else had merged, I think. Northrop has merged with Grumman. So as a result, you've got consolidation. And we're going to talk more about that as we get to oligopolies. That was the idea of getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which makes this cost issue even more difficult to get over the hurdle. There's some industries just takes too much to enter. Now, obviously, there's a lot of cash sloshing around in the world today. So there are some industries that were once thought to be impenetrable because you just couldn't get into them, like the drug industry. It used to be considered improbable that somebody could start a new drug company, and yet we have lots and lots of drug competitors to the point where we don't even include them in this sort of oligopoly category of just a few firms competing. The auto industry was thought to have high barriers to entry for a very long time. We had 3 major corporations selling cars in this country. And today we've got many more, simply because of the fact that there's a lot more money in the world. It's an international market. And so now we've got all kinds of competitors. A lot of the vehicles that you see running around today are not even, don't have brands that are US based in the first place. Okay. So cost is a financial consideration there. Also, another one here is, this is one that's going to sound a little bit out of place, but barriers to exit or barriers to entry. Okay, what's a barrier to exit? Well, it's everything here except it's the entire definition, except you change this word to leaving the market. So why is the inability to leave a market an entry barrier? It's because if you know you can't get out, you might not get in. How do we get out of something we know when do we want to get into something that we know we can't get out of? And that's oftentimes a consideration in business. Oftentimes, and for those of you who may want to take finance courses or even accounting, you'll see this idea of what's called payback, and you want some business owners, business firms want to know how long is it going to take us to get our money back from doing something, and at the end of this period, can we leave? Can we do something else? Particularly this market doesn't look like it's any good in the long run. Maybe in the short run we want to get into it, but how do we get out? Well, you might not be able to get out because of legal barriers or other sorts of considerations. One example I can think of is the banking industry. For years, a lot of banks were sort of reluctant to build branches, particularly in lower income areas, because it's always difficult to close those branches because it becomes a legal challenge. Because there's a law in the books that says that all depository institutions are to serve all segments, all income segments of the market area in which they serve. That includes low to moderate income households. And so you can't just say, okay, we're only going to put our branches in the high income areas of town, and we're not going to go into the poor areas, because that's illegal. So this is why a lot of banks don't set up branches there in the first place, because they know that if it doesn't work out, they can't really leave. It becomes a big deal. Even shutting down ATM machines is thought to have been an issue there. So barriers to exit is anything which prevents you from leaving. Think about other barriers to entry. Sometimes these are physical in nature, and that is that whatever the form of business that you're in, you're always going to be in that business because you can't morph it into something else, and you're pretty much stuck, whatever it is. If you buy a racetrack, for instance, for horses, right? There's no way you're going to ever be able to convert that into anything else. It is a horse track for horses, and it's difficult to think of whatever the case might be. Now, I know there was one example of a racetrack in LA called Hollywood Park that was started back in the 30s. And for years, residents didn't like having a horse track in that area. They thought it's crazy. We have all these multi-million-dollar homes, and then right down the street, we have to smell horses and all that. And there's all this traffic, and people who are driving through the area, driving out of the area, and all that. And so it took a very long time, but they got that shut down so that developers could build, guess what, housing on that land. But it took a lot, and that was a barrier to exit, because it's not just easy to shut something down once it's going. So that's an example of a barrier to entry. Okay. What are some others here? I'm trying to think if there are any others. I probably should put this on a slide actually at some point, but maybe I'll think about doing that. But these are some examples of entry barriers. That is anything which would stop firms from coming in, including this idea of barriers to exit. If you know you can't get out, why get in the first place? And that's an important thing. And this is something I think is a lot less frequently thought of, particularly in the public mind, as to why firms get out of certain things, is because they don't plan to be in them for a long period of time anyway. And I think that this kind of goes against one of the things that we particularly focus on in the accounting world. There's this assumption called the going concern principle, the idea that we assume that business is going to be there forever. And that idea has come under some challenge in recent years, because a lot of firms know that they don't want to be in a particular business for a long period of time. They just want to be in it for however long it's profitable, and then they want to get out and do something else because they don't see a long-term future in it. Okay. And by the way, we're going to talk about that a bit later as well. We talk about industries that are dying, but yet why stop doing it if you're still making money? But there are firms that still make sewing machines, even though sewing machines are not really a thing that most people have in their homes today. When I was a kid, of course, I'm probably the oldest person here, I think. Everyone had a sewing machine today, not so much. And so why not keep making them if there's some market? And by the way, if there's nobody wanting to enter that business, it gives you kind of a free rein to do whatever you want, because you may be the only seller in that particular market, as small and as dying as it may be. Okay. So this idea of low barriers to exit, what does that mean with perfect competition? It means firms can come in and they can leave, come in, leave, come in, leave. And by the way, this is a reality of perfect competition that doesn't exist at all in the other three market structures. I pointed out the differences between the first two, perfect competition, monopoly, and said that you could sort of flip these around. Well, this particular category, you can flip all the characteristics around and they're opposites to one another, with the exception of profit maximization. But here, all three of these are cases in which there is no free entry and exit in the market in those imperfectly competitive structures. There is imperfect competition. And this explains why we sort of segregate out perfect competition from the others, because it really has a lot to do with entry and exit of competing firms. That is, if firms come in, they can bring the price down, and if firms leave, the price goes up. And it's simply a back and forth push-pull over long time periods, okay? All right, what are some other characteristics? No one seller can influence the market price and output. So in other words, firms are price takers. When we say firms are price takers, we're also saying that buyers are price takers, but we're mostly interested here in the supply side. And that is the price is what the price is. No one firm can do anything to manipulate the price because our market share is so small. They don't have anything that we would call market power. Market power is simply this ability to control the price of the product and to control the form of the product, what it looks like, how it's sold, how it's packaged, how it's promoted, how it's regulated. There's none of that kind of power at all. And the issue here really concerns price. The firms take whatever the price is, okay? So that's an important thing for us to be aware of, is that no firm can influence it. Also, another part that's really important is the idea that products are standardized / commoditized. Okay, what does this mean? Because this is, and I want to sort of clarify something, because I hear this term commodities all the time, and people use it mostly incorrectly, because a lot of times people use the term commodities to refer to anything which is sold. And that's not really true from our own definition in economics. We're saying commodity is any product that's exactly like all of the other products that are sold within the market. That is, they're fungible. They can be replaced. You wouldn't know the difference between the two products. Green beans are green beans, potatoes are potatoes, coal is coal. And I know there are different kinds of coals and different kinds of oil and whatnot, but for the most part, even within those categories, there's no real difference at all. The products are standardized or commoditized. And any efforts to try to promote those products as being a little bit different is oftentimes a recipe for failure. I know the Idaho Potato Farmers Association tried for decades to try to get people to, hey, think Idaho potatoes are somehow superior to other potatoes. But instead, do we really care? If you go to the store to buy potatoes, do we care where the potatoes came from? Do we care whether they came from Montana, South Dakota, or California, or do they come from Idaho? I don't know that people really do care, and we don't care for the most part. They're standardized or commoditized. And so, and there's no indication really where it came from, and there's no demand on the part of buyers to care because they are considered to be the same. So we're talking a lot of agricultural output is almost the perfect exemplar of an industry that falls into this perfect competition category. Now, one other thing I should say, and I probably should have mentioned this at the outset, is that we're going to use the term market and industry interchangeably in this section of the class. And I know that in the accounting world or in the marketing world, the term market and industry are separate. The market will refer to the demand side and the industry to the supply side. So I just want to make clear that sometimes we use those terms interchangeably, and we will do it in this class. Market and industry are going to be used interchangeably, realizing, of course, that there are people in the business world that would say the market is the demand side, the industry is the supply side. And I get that, and they're probably more right than what we are, to be real honest with you. So, but market structure is what we're talking about here. It's the way that the market itself is organized, because there are some demand side elements that are going on here, and we'll talk about those in a second. Okay. All right. Price equals marginal revenue. Now, we haven't talked much about marginal revenue, but I'm going to get to that here in just a second. It'll be one of the last things I get to today. And that is the demand curve is assumed to be perfectly elastic. Let's hold on to that, because I'm going to be coming back to that. This is going to be an important thing for us to be talking about as we get going throughout this, because this is going to be the only market structure in which we can say this. The market demand curve is perfectly elastic, which means what? Perfectly flat. And so we'll talk about why that is, and what that means, and what the implications are. Okay. Also, the market is intensely competitive. That probably goes without saying after all that we have talked about here. Is the idea if any firm can, if firms are making profit in this market, this is the thing to think about. Firms are making profit, and what does that encourage, especially when barriers to entry are low? It encourages competition. Why not get into that? If somebody is making money, it's obvious people are making money, then I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of that action. So as a result, if I can do it, I do it, because the barriers to entry are fairly low to do that. Think about this, and think about the oil industry, and think about oil drilling. Now, we think of the oil industry as, you would think it's got very high barriers to entry, and it does for things like refining and pipelines and distribution, but for drilling, not so much. And what has happened for many decades, probably the better part of 100 years at least, is you've got firms that are drillers. That's all they do is drill. When the price of oil is high, they rush into the market and just drill, right? I sound like Sarah Palin, right? Or drill, baby, drill, right? They just drill like crazy, because why? It's not hard to get into. It's rather easy to find leases. You just simply lease the property, a lot of times from the government, which is very willing to do that. And as a result, they just drill like crazy. And then when there's a lot of oil on the market, the price goes down, They take their equipment out and they put it in warehouses, they store it, and then wait 6, 8, 10 years, whatever, the price goes back up. And then they come back into the market. And that's one of the explanations for why oil and the product that we all buy, gasoline, goes up, down, up, down, up, down. It's this supply back and forth, this discombobulation. It's not just, you know, when you think of these leases as being long-term things, and maybe a couple of years is long to some of us, maybe 3 or 4 years. And we saw certainly a lot of this back a few years ago when oil prices were very high. And we saw even here in New Mexico, a lot of people flocking to these oil jobs. And we had these temporary camps set up, people living in RVs just to get high wages because of all the drilling that was going on because the price of oil was so, it was over $100 per barrel. So everyone was making money. But then guess what happened? The price of oil fell. So they shut those wells down. And so as a result, the supply fell. The price came back up. And so it's back and forth, this riding up and down. This is why that one product is very much associated with volatility. And as long as we have this dynamic, I think we're going to continue to have ups and downs in the price of gasoline. And by the way, I know that I've got a younger niece who lives with us, and she is talking about the fact, oh my God, look at the price of gasoline. We hit $4 a gallon. I said, don't worry, it'll go down. And she looked at me like I was from outer space. Yeah, it's going to go down. Okay, things don't go down in price. I said, just wait. It always happens. It's been doing it forever. It goes up, it goes down. It goes up, it goes down. Now, the longer trend price of it goes up just because the price of pretty much everything goes up. But nonetheless, you get these wild discombobulations. But that's one example of intense competition with low barriers to entry. With low barriers to entry, you can come in, you can leave, and exit, by the way. So it's to shut these operations down. And the same goes with agriculture, mining, and we'll give you some examples of some industries that are almost tailor-made as defining aspects of this. Sorry to see what time it was there. Okay, economic profit is possible in the short run, but is unplanned and is due in the long run to mostly economic luck. So there's a short run and long run dimension of this that we need to talk about that is much more important in perfect competition than it is in the other three structure types that we're going to be getting into. When we say it's possible in the short run, we're talking, first of all, about economic profit. That is, it's the most profitable thing that one can be doing with the labor and the capital goods is to produce this particular good in the short run because there's profit to be made, but it's mostly due to economic luck. So think about these oil drillers, you know, the price of oil is high, so you get in there and you start drilling oil and you get making all this money. And you might think you're a genius, but instead really you're being rewarded because you're economically lucky. And it sounds like I just kind of made this term up, but this is an actual term in economics, so it's economic luck. And there are lots of cases in which people have gotten economic benefits from the fact that they were simply in the right place, right time. They're lucky. It's economic luck. It's due to randomness more than anything else. Warren Buffett, the investor, has talked about the lottery of having good parents and having parents that care for you, that are from an economic standpoint, that put you on a path to success, whereas some people are not quite as blessed. And so, and obviously he was in this particular case. So you get the idea. It's randomness. It's not fair. Certainly, there's no fairness aspect to it. You're just in the right place at the right time. So winning the lottery is an example of that. Being at the right place at the right time. You know, certainly politics is a lot of economic luck. Being in the right place at the right time. It's just it's random. Okay. And by the way, it will change. And so those who are rewarded oftentimes are rewarded, but it's in the short run only, because in the long run, if anybody's getting benefits, everybody else wants a part of it. Okay, so economic luck is a short-term phenomenon. And we're going to talk a bit more about this a bit later too, when we talk about this idea of how government will sometimes allocate certain goods to certain actors, and it's a lot like this idea of exclusive dealing, but we'll talk about this idea of what's called a monopsony market, where government is the single buyer of a good. And it's usually government that's the only buyer of things like, particularly things like military products. If you're lucky to get the contract, you're lucky to get the contract, and nobody else gets it. Okay. So economic profit is zero in the long run. And we're saying price is equal to marginal revenue, which equals average cost. Now, marginal revenue, we're going to talk about that term here in a minute. So that's going to be important. And one of the most important concepts, and this is the only one of these really that I can think of that is going to be common in all four structure types. And that is the profit maximizing output is the point at which marginal revenue equals marginal. And it's this idea of equating and linking together these marginals that is going to be very important for our particular purposes here. Okay. So let me do that. Any questions so far? I feel like I've speaking of monopoly, I've been sort of monopolizing the debate here. So, okay, well, let's do this. I'm gonna sort of do a little bit of diagram here and show a little bit about what this looks like. And I'm going to start with talking about marginal revenue. This is we talked a lot about marginal costs last time, but we didn't really get into marginal revenue very much last time. So what is marginal revenue? So first of all, marginal cost is simply, we'll come back to what we know, it's the change in total cost divided by the change in total product or the change in output, whatever the case might be. Well, what is marginal revenue? Marginal revenue is a very similar concept. It's the change in total revenue divided by the change in total product or quantity, whichever you prefer there. That's what marginal revenue is. It's incremental revenue. It's incremental revenue. And, oh, I need to swivel my camera here. Sorry. So remember that when we talk about marginals, what's the definition that we're saying here about marginals is we're saying they're incrementals. Okay, we're saying these are incremental values. Okay, so and I know that your textbook and probably all textbooks talk about this idea of if I produce one extra unit of a product, what is my marginal revenue? In reality, it's probably not one extra unit, it's maybe the next 10,000 units or 1 million units or 10 million, whatever the case might be. So you kind of get the idea as to how that works there. So let's have an idea. Let's start. We won't get into the inputs here necessarily, but we'll instead talk about total outputs here. And we're going to say that the price of the good we're going to say the price can't be changed. So the price is relatively fixed. And so we have price times quantity, which equals total revenue. Remember, price times quantity equals total revenue, right? So let's say that we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? And we got a price of a product of $5. Okay, so we're saying the price of the product can't be changed for whatever reason. And so price times quantity, then you've got 0 outputs, so there's 0, so there's 0 units being produced. And I guess we could sort of make up a change in product. Actually, you know what? We probably just get rid of this total product and just go with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's probably easier. Okay, but I do want to sort of talk about the idea that the total product, particularly for those who look around other resources, will see that you can see these total product and sometimes listed in the denominator, sometimes quantity. It's the same thing, basically. Okay, so total revenue, price times quantity, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. Well, then what do we got going on with marginal revenue? Marginal revenue is simply what here? It's simply a change in incremental revenue from 0 to 5. 5 to 10 is 5, 10 to 15 is 5. And we go all the way down the list. And even if we were to make different numbers here, right? Even if we were to say, okay, well, let's say the quantities are different, okay? And let's say that now we've got quantities like, and I'm going to do this on the fly here, so kind of bear with me a little bit. Actually, let me save it a little bit so that everybody can write that down. And then you can kind of go from there. And I'll sort of change the numbers up a little bit. Because just to make it seem like it's not just simply copying $5 over, and it really is the change in total revenue. Okay. So let's say that we have different values for quantity. Let's say we've got 0 and I'll just sort of make up some numbers. That's 7 and 9 and 12 and 18 and 20. And we're going to have different total revenue figures here. And so we're going to calculate marginal revenue for all of these. Okay, so we've got 0 here, but now we've got 5 times 7 is 35. Okay. So what is the marginal revenue? It's the change in total revenue divided by change in price. Change in total product or change in quantity. So in other words, it's 35 minus 0 over what? 7 minus 0. So it's I'm sorry, it's 35 minus 7. Wait, 35. Yeah, 35 minus 0. 35 minus 0. Am I doing this right here? 35 minus 0, change in total revenue, and 7 minus 0. So you get 35 over 7, which equals 5. Okay, I am doing it right. And I apologize, I just don't have a lot of board space to work with here. And even that board over here is not much to work with. Okay. So if you do this all the way down the line here, and you can just compute this, you got 45, 60, 90, 100. You're going to have, it's going to be the same sort of issue all the way along the line here. So for instance, you're going to have 100 minus 90 over minus 90 over 20 minus 5, right? Oh, 18 minus, oh, you're right. 20 minus 18, you're right. Getting myself confused here. So you get 10 over 2, which is 5. So it's going to be 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, all the way down. 100 minus 90, 20 minus 18. Yeah, that's right. So it's going to be 5 all the way down. So in other words, marginal revenue is going to be relatively fixed in the short run. And I'll leave you to sort of, I'll sort of leave that there. Let's so you can have a chance to write that up. So what is it that now we need to be thinking of when it comes to marginal revenue? Okay. Well, first of all, what do we say here in this slide? We said the price is equal to marginal revenue. Okay. So, and in fact, isn't that the same case here? Price is 5, marginal revenue is 5. Now, on the face of it, you might say, well, of course, marginal revenue is going to be 5, because if I sell a product for $5 and we're talking about the change in one product, it's $5, right? Okay, that's true. However, what we're saying is that not all structures are like this, because maybe not all products are sold at $5. In this case, we're saying they all sell for the same price because there's no pricing power and there's no ability to slice and dice the market on the part of the supply side to say, okay, we're going to charge different buyers different prices. And in fact, that is a reality that sometimes sellers in the real world will try to charge different buyers different prices for their products. And we're going to talk much more about that as we get into the next segment of monopoly, where we talk about this idea of different prices to different buyers, like matinee pricing. Matinee prices for movies are less expensive than prices at 7 p.m., 8 p.m., whatever. It's a different kind of buyer, different elasticity altogether. Okay. All right. So questions about that. So you've got marginal revenue is equal to price. We'll bring in the average total cost figure a bit later. I don't think I'll get to that today. That'll be a good jumping off point for Wednesday. But instead, what I want to do is this. I want to focus on the fact that in perfect competition, we've got a split screen view going on here. And it's the only structure in which we've got that, where we've got the market on the left as one split screen, and then we've got the firm on the right. Okay, and make sure the camera's picking that up. Okay, yeah. All right, so we got the market on the left and the firm on the right. So what have we got going on here? Well, it's the same thing we've seen before. We've got an upward sloping supply curve, right? We have a downward sloping demand curve looking something like that, right? And then we have some sort of equilibrium price that's arrived at as the intersection of demand and supply. And we're saying equilibrium, and this is again nothing new here. This is equilibrium price is simply that short-term state of balance in a market as to price. Again, short-term. That's the thing that we should emphasize here, is that this is a case in which you want to sort of take a picture of it, right? Take a snapshot picture and say, this is the price today. Okay. So when it comes to this, what do we got going on here? It's a bit of a split screen. The firm, if the firm is a price taker, the firm takes that price and can sell any amount of output. And one convention that we use in economics very often is, if we're talking about something big versus small, we'll put capital letters over here, and we'll put small letters over here, just to denote the fact that we're talking about something smaller. So the firm is a price taker. It can produce any amount of quantity at the same price, whatever that price is. And so the price that we've given over here is $5, right? That was the price that's given. And so the price here is also $5. There's nothing that we can really do about the price. And so as a result, this is effectively the demand curve. And because of the demand curve, it's also the marginal revenue curve, which is vertical. In other words, it's perfectly elastic. That is, it's perfectly flat, meaning that whatever the price is whatever the price is. I can sell as many units as I want. The marginal revenue, that is the incremental change in revenue that I get, divided by the incremental change in output along this axis, is going to always be the same. And it's going to be equivalent to the price of the good. I can't do anything to change the price of the good whatsoever. Okay. And so the firm bobs along here and takes $5. Now, does it always take $5? What if it doesn't like $5? Well, then it's free to leave the market to the extent that it is. And I know that we sort of present this idea of low entry barriers and low exit barriers as being very simple decisions of coming and going, and like a revolving door, it's no big deal. And it actually is a big deal. And so I get that. I mean, it's one thing to stop operating altogether. You have to terminate leases, you've got to return equipment. Oftentimes it means renegotiating debt with creditors, you've got to pay workers, you've got to tell workers they're leaving, and none of this is easy and fast. But it's a heck of a lot easier and fast than shutting down a business that's got multiple, sorts of locations, and it's got all kinds of contracts and lots of debt, and and maybe stock out there, and it's got stock, you've got lawsuits that are pending, and there are all kinds of issues that complicate the matter that we don't really see in what are typically small-ish enterprises with perfect competition. Perfect competition is almost a it's almost a descriptor of small businesses in general. They all, for the most part, tend to kind of deal with some of these issues. And it takes a while for businesses to get to the point of size where they can command market power. Instead, they kind of go along with what the flow is. So think about this. And we haven't brought cost in this picture yet, but we will. So let's say we've got S and we've got some new entrants coming into the market for whatever reason. Okay. So new entrants in the market means the supply shift to the right in the market. Mean that new entrants come in, they drive the price down. So now what used to be a price of 5, so P equals 5 here now falls to P equals 3. And again, it's just simply a new equilibrium condition. We'll call that P prime, a price of 3. And as a result, the firms over here will now take 3. So D prime and R prime is now not 5, but is 3. Okay, so P prime is 3. So the firm takes the price as given, it has no choice but to do. And so as a result, we're saying the firm is along for the ride. Whatever happens to the price of the good, mostly as a result of new entrants coming in. But new entrants coming in force the prices down. And if you think about it, just think about markets in which we have seen over time, new competitors enter the market and the prices have come down. Think about things like cell services. We've gotten new competitors, both on the supply of the physical product itself, as well as new suppliers of service. I mean, cell service should be really, really expensive. I mean, I can remember, about 30 years ago, I would pay a couple $100 a month. It was like a big deal if somebody kept you on the phone for a couple minutes. It's like, I want to get off the phone. I mean, it was extremely expensive. Today, nobody really cares about how long they're on their phone, right? It's the fact that there's a lot of new competitions come in. Some of that's due to the cost of production going down. We'll get to that dynamic a bit more horizontally. But nonetheless, the prices have been forced down. We've seen lots of product prices fall. So to push back against the narrative that says that all prices go up over time, sometimes the price of things do go down. And it's simply because of the fact of new competition coming in. Now, also, there's this reality of economies of scale, too. We talked about that last time, that from the supply side, you can enjoy lower costs as you produce more output. That also translates into, if it's cheaper to do something, right? You're going to do more of it. Remember, that goes back to our very first description of what could cause supply to shift. If it costs less to do something, you're going to want to shift to the right. And all of that has the effect on the demand side of bringing the price of the product down. Okay. Now, on the other hand, what about anything which will restrict supply? So now, if supply shifts this direction, so now we got S double prime. Now we've got some new price, a new equilibrium price is say, now it's 9, right? Well, now the firm will take $9. If they'll take 5, they'll definitely take 9. And so as a result, now you've got $9. And so as a result, the firm can bob along with these prices or not. And we're going to get to this point next time about what it means then to have a condition which you accept the price or you don't, and it becomes a take or leave it proposition. And that gets us into something called break even and shutdown point. And that's something that we'll get to a bit next time. So, okay, so I think that's really all that I wanted to get into today, because I think that that's set up for me to do for the issue of what the long run looks like. This is the short run view. When I said take a picture of it, that's what really we're talking about. We talk about a short run view. These things are changing. The prices are going up, they're going down as firms come and go. And we see fluctuations in a lot of the goods that we see in these particular kinds of markets. And so when we come back on Wednesday, we'll talk more about the types of firms. I've already sort of given you a bit of a lead into these things like agricultural output, timber, a lot of these things that deal with natural resources, which really can't be sliced and diced. And yeah, it may be possible for scientists to tell where a potato was grown. Demand side doesn't discern any difference at all. So you get the idea that to the demand side, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. And this is really one of the impacts of it. And this is why we're going to make the case that life is difficult and sometimes it's short and it's indefinite for producers in these kinds of industries. Okay, so questions for me about anything that we've talked about here so far? Okay, well, if you do have questions for me about anything, particularly regarding the test, or if we need to do a makeup, feel free to get with me and I'll be around all week, as I usually am. And we'll pick this up and then we'll sort of migrate our way into the next chapter, which we do open up. Have a good rest of your day. See you next time.